So yeah, it was a 3-year research project from 2007 to 2010, and it was funded by the Department of Children, Schools and Families. Those were the days. And it was basically looking at ways to improve educational outcomes for Gypsy Roma travellers. And just as a piece of background, that for many years people have been aware that there were a lot of issues with Gypsy Roma travellers, not engaging with school, underachieving in school, exclusions from school. But there was no hard data till 2003 when there were 2 ethnic monitoring categories developed. WIRT, which is Travellers of Irish Heritage, and WROM, which is Gypsy Roma. And that, as you can hear, includes 2 Romani groups, the English Gypsies who came about 500 years ago, and the Roma from Eastern Europe who came in the last 10 years or so. So we've got two very different groups, although they have a common cultural heritage. One is a group who have been part of English society for a long time, although on the margins, and another group who are from the margins of European society, who've come as EAL learners, but with other issues as well, the Roma. So that's who we're talking about. And once these 2 ethnic categories were established, there began to be real concern about the levels of underachievement. And the DCSF had some very positive officials who managed to grab a bit of money and put what I think is a very positive spin on it. How can we improve outcomes rather than how bad is it? And I'm not going to trouble you with how bad it is, because that would have taken most of the presentation. All right, the methodology, it included a literature review, which there hadn't been a literature review. It then included a data analysis, which was done by the NFER statistical department. And it looked at the entire national cohort of children who identified to these 2 ethnic categories. And it looked at attainment, attendance and exclusions data over a 5-year period, which I think was 2004 to 2009. And it had in the proposal a notion to compare Gypsy Roma travellers to a parallel group of other children. And you'll see later, when it came to trying to find a parallel group, it gets quite complicated. Third element was progress mapping. There were questionnaires sent out in 2007 and 2009 to virtually all schools that we could identify with significant numbers of Gypsy Roma travellers. And in the end, you may know, the numbers of travellers in the country is about 300,000, which is actually about the same number, I believe, as Jews. So it's quite a significant community, but it's a very distributed community. So in any particular school and in any particular area, there are usually only quite small numbers of children. So we sent questionnaires to the 200 schools who had most children, particularly the secondary schools. The project was really looking at secondary, but because there was primary good practice, and also because things happen between primary and secondary, we looked at primary schools, a selection of primary schools, and virtually every secondary school who had any kind of numbers of travellers. And basically we're probably talking about 10 or above, really quite small numbers. And then we made 15 visits to schools, 10 to secondary schools, 5 to primary schools, And in those schools, we had face-to-face interviews with usually head teacher or senior leader, people within the school responsible for Gypsy Roma travellers, governors, and then we had a focus group of parents and a focus group of children and any other staff within the school that the school wanted us to talk to. And it wasn't hugely critical. It was basically a dialogue. We went in, we spent the day, and we listened to what they had to tell us. We didn't make any assessment really of whether what they told us was what the reality was. We just didn't have time, we didn't have that sort of role. But we let them tell their stories and we noted it and we tried to put together stuff from that. These were the key findings of the literature review. And again, one of the things I wanted you to do is think through to what extent are these specific to Gypsy Roma travellers? To what extent are they relevant to children who might be on the margins, newly arrived, or for some reason socially excluded? And to what extent do these apply to significant groups of children, for example, white working class? So I hope that can go on within the session. Okay, so whole school policies, school leadership, senior management, having an inclusive ethos. That was found to be very important in the literature. Training of new staff, training of continuing professional development. Recognition of social, cultural, economic issues. The whole thing of marginalisation, of, in some cases, poverty, mobility, not having places to live, experiences of racism and racist abuse, that was all seen to be there in most of the literature. The need for flexibility within the curriculum, flexibility in order to meet the needs of the children, taking account of previous learning, taking account of interests and priorities, but also going into possibly vocational curriculum. Coordination across children's services was referred to, and the involvement of the communities in the development of policies and practice at national and local levels, which would also include the employment of staff from the communities in schools. So that's what the literature had, but very little of it was underpinned by hard data. There was an Ofsted, the HMI reports, Ofsted reports, some research, but generally the points were made, but there wasn't actual proof. And I think the government, particularly with its focus on data, was hoping that we'd come up with something a little bit more concrete.